A remarkable gathering took place last week in the Russian port city of Vladivostok, a place historically seen as Russia's gateway to the east. The leaders of four major world powers, Russia, China, India, and North Korea, convened for what was billed as an economic forum, but, honestly, it felt much more like a political statement. Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted Chinese President Xi Jinping, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, in a move that captured global attention. This was not a routine diplomatic event. It was a carefully orchestrated assembly of nations at odds with the current direction of American foreign policy. The implications extend beyond the economic agreements signed. They signal a potential realignment of global power dynamics for the 21st century. The very presence of these four leaders is significant. For decades, the global order has been defined by the United States and its alliances. Russia and China have long shared a strategic partnership, often united by opposition to American dominance. India's inclusion marks a profound shift. North Korea's participation adds complexity and defiance. Vladivostok was a demonstration of a desire to create a world where American influence is not the sole factor. The official agenda focused on economic development in Russia's Far East, but the subtext was unmistakably geopolitical. Leaders called for a multipolar world order, a code for a system not dominated by a single superpower, sending a message that an alternative coalition is forming. In the world of international diplomacy, symbolism often speaks louder than communiques. The Vladivostok summit was a masterclass in political theater. It was designed to convey a message of unity and shared purpose. The carefully choreographed photo opportunities, especially the group handshakes, were broadcast around the world. Putin, Xi, Modi, Kim. These images were a deliberate projection of a new bloc. Seeing the leaders of 1/5 of the world's population standing shoulder to shoulder, smiling and shaking hands creates a powerful narrative. It suggests the era of American-led global consensus is over. Other major powers are ready to forge their own path, together. Kim Jong-un's arrival was the most dramatic moment. He traveled on his iconic armored green train. The slow, deliberate procession built anticipation and underscored his participation. By welcoming him so warmly, Putin and Xi signaled they would set regional terms, not the United States. It was a direct challenge to Washington's strategy of isolation. Inside the summit halls, the body language was telling. Warm embraces and extended handshakes between Putin and Xi reinforced their no-limits partnership. Respectful, engaged conversations between Modi and his Chinese and Russian counterparts suggested a deliberate effort to overcome past frictions. These were not the tense formal interactions of G7 or G20. Instead, there was an air of camaraderie, leaders on the same side of a great geopolitical divide. Vladivostok, ruler of the East, was a fitting backdrop for declaring that centers of global power are shifting. What is driving these historically cautious and sometimes rivalrous nations into a closer embrace? The answer, in large part, can be found in Washington. The foreign policy of the Trump administration, characterized by its America First approach, has acted as a powerful accelerant. President Trump's willingness to challenge long-standing alliances, impose unilateral tariffs, withdraw from international agreements, created instability and unpredictability. China, Russia, India, North Korea, this approach looked openly hostile to their national interests. They felt pushed into a corner and sought solidarity with others under pressure. The Trump administration's tactics departed from traditional diplomacy. Instead of building coalitions and soft power, it relied on public criticism, economic threats, and a transactional view of international relations. For China, a bruising trade war. For Russia, continued sanctions and condemnation. For India, tariffs on steel, tariffs on aluminum, and criticism over its trade surplus. For North Korea, swings between threats of fire and fury and made-for-TV summits that yielded little. One of the most consequential developments in this shifting global landscape is, honestly, the changing posture of India. For nearly 2 decades, successive U.S. administrations, Republican and Democrat, invested heavily in building a strategic partnership with New Delhi. India, the world's largest democracy, a rising economic power, could serve as a vital partner in Asia and a democratic counterweight to an increasingly assertive China. This so-called Indo-Pacific strategy was a cornerstone of American foreign policy. Yet recent events suggest that this partnership is under significant strain, pushing India to reconsider its options and look toward its more traditional partners. The turning point can be traced directly to the trade policies of the Trump administration. 2018, 2019. The US imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from India, and later removed India from the Generalized System of Preferences, a program that allowed many Indian goods to enter the US duty-free. For New Delhi, these moves were seen as a betrayal. India viewed itself as a strategic partner, not an economic adversary. This economic friction created a deep sense of frustration within the Indian establishment. In response to this perceived American unreliability, India has visibly tilted back towards Russia, its long-standing defense partner from the Cold War era. Despite the threat of US sanctions, India moved forward with a multi-billion-dollar deal to purchase the Russian S-400 air defense system. This decision was a clear signal that India would prioritize its own national security interests over American directives. While China's economic rise is a long-term challenge to the global order, Russia's actions are often more immediately disruptive, designed to test the boundaries of Western power and resolve. Moscow has become really adept at using asymmetric tactics to project influence far beyond its economic weight. Cyber warfare, election interference, bold military maneuvers. A recent incident over the Baltic Sea perfectly illustrates this approach. A Russian fighter jet was reported to have interfered with the flight path of a European civilian airliner, a highly provocative action that flouts international aviation safety norms. This was not an accident. It was a calculated act of intimidation. Such incidents are part of a broader pattern aimed at sowing disunity among Western allies and reasserting Russia's status as a great power. By engaging in these risky maneuvers, Moscow signals it does not feel constrained by established international rules. It forces Western governments into a reactive posture, creating headlines and fueling debates about how to respond. The goal is not direct conflict, but a constant state of low-level tension to keep adversaries off balance and to demonstrate that Russia is a force that cannot be ignored or contained. It is a classic move from the playbook of a power that feels encircled and seeks to break out. Russia's assertiveness is not limited to the skies over Europe. Military intervention in Syria, annexation of Crimea, support for separatists in eastern Ukraine. These actions chip away at the post-Cold War settlement, which Russia views as a historical injustice. By hosting the Vladivostok summit, Putin complements hard power with a diplomatic offensive. Back in Washington, the growing alignment of these four powers is being met with a mixture of concern and partisan division. Many foreign policy experts see this development as a direct consequence of the Trump administration's erratic and alienating approach to diplomacy. Adam Smith, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, articulated this view bluntly, stating that U.S. policy has pushed countries like India closer to Russia and China. He argued that by imposing tariffs on allies and questioning the value of long-standing partnerships, the United States had effectively created the very coalition it should have been working to prevent. This perspective suggests the problem is largely a self-inflicted wound. This critique highlights a fundamental debate within the American foreign policy establishment. One side argues that the U.S. must maintain its traditional role as the leader of a rules-based international order, which requires cultivating alliances and using diplomacy rather than coercion. From this viewpoint, treating a strategic partner like India as an economic adversary over a trade deficit was a catastrophic error. It undermined decades of diplomatic investment for the sake of a short-sighted economic goal and sent a signal to the world that America's friendship was conditional and unreliable. On the other side of the debate are those who supported the America First agenda. They argue that for too long, the United States has shouldered the burden of maintaining global security while other countries engaged in unfair trade practices. The central question hanging over the Vladivostok summit: will this new alignment translate into concrete, coordinated action? More than powerful symbolism? More than anti-American rhetoric? The historical baggage and divergent interests among these four nations are significant deep-seated border disputes between India and China, strategic rivalry between India and China, Russia and China, competitors and partners. A formal NATO-style military alliance seems highly unlikely. Dismissing this coalition as purely symbolic would be a mistake. Even without a formal treaty, coordinated action in specific domains is real. Increased intelligence sharing between Russia and China, joint military exercises including India, a unified diplomatic front at the United Nations economically, accelerating de-dollarization of trade, creating alternative payment systems to bypass U.S. sanctions. North Korea gains a political and economic lifeline from Moscow and Beijing, reducing its incentive to bow to U.S. pressure on denuclearization. Long-term implications for American power are profound. For decades, U.S. global dominance rested on two pillars: unrivaled military and economic might, extensive network of alliances. While its military remains supreme, the alliance's pillar looks shaky. A credible bloc of major powers fundamentally changes the strategic calculus. The US can no longer assume support from regional players like India. Economic sanctions are less effective if countries turn to a Russia-China economic axis, not the end of American influence, possibly the end of uncontested American primacy. The world is moving from a unipolar moment to a multipolar reality. The US must learn to operate with multiple centers of power, negotiate and compromise, rather than dictate. Summit in Vladivostok was a sign. Russia, China, India and others are building their own field and writing their own rules. Washington must recognize and adapt before it finds itself on the sidelines. While one party blames the other for the current state of affairs, the world is not standing still. Putin, Xi and others are capitalizing on this American inward focus and disarray to advance their own agendas. The critical question for the US is whether it can move beyond the partisan blame game and develop a new, effective strategy to navigate this more complex and contested global landscape.